Welcome. How are you? So, I have 4 books that I'm going to read chapter 1 on, and I'm going to ask y'all to help me pick which one I'm going to read for September. Are you ready? The first book is this one here. It is by an author that I read in August by the name of Jude Deverox. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but the title is called Lavender Morning. I chose this. It's a romance because Jack wanted me to read another romance, so I just picked the same author to do it. Okay, so if this is your first time here, I don't necessarily read the back of the book to find out what it's about. I just go ahead in and see. So, and I also read just chapter 1 of each book until I pick one for September. So here we go. This book has how many pages? Okay. 476 pages, and it's 27 chapters. Prologue. Helen, asked the person on the other end of the line. Helen Aldridge? If anyone had asked her, Helen would have said that it had been so long since she heard Edelyn Harcourt's voice that she wouldn't have recognized it. But she did. She heard those elegant patrician's tones only a few times, but each time had been significant. Because of who the caller was, Helen didn't point out that her married name was Connor. Miss Eddie, is that you? What a good memory you have. Helen visualized the woman as she remembered her. Tall, thin, perfect posture, her dark hair never out of place. Her clothes were always on the finest quality and of a timeless style. She had to be close to 90 now. Helen's father's David's age. I had a good ancestors, Helen said, then wanted to bite her tongue. Her father and Miss Eddie had once been engaged to marry, but when Eddie returned from World War II, her beloved David was married to Helen's mother, Mary Alice Welsh. The trauma had been so great that Miss Eddie turned the big old house her family had owned for generations over to her rascal of a brother, left the town named for her ancestries, and never married. Even today, some of the older people in Edeling spoke of the great tragedy, and they still looked at Helen's mother with cool eyes. What David and Mary Alice had done caused the end of the direct line of the Harcourt family, the founding family. Since Edeling, Virginia was so near colonial Williamsburg, losing direct descendants of people who had hobnobbed with George Washington and Thomas Jefferson was a major blow to them. Yes, you do have good ancestries, Miss Eddie said without hesitation. In fact, I'm so sure of your capabilities that I decided to ask you to help me. Help you? Helen asked cautiously. All her life, she'd been told of the feuds and angers that had come about because of what happened in her father's lifetime. She wasn't supposed to have heard about it because everything was talked about in whispers. But Helen had always been a curious person. She sat to one side of the porch, played with her dolls, and listened. Yes, dear, help, Miss Eddie said in a patronizing way that made Helen blush. I'm not going to ask you to bake 100 cookies for the church sale, so you can get that out of your mind. I wasn't. Helen started to defend herself, then stopped. She was at the kitchen sink, and she could see her husband James outside struggling with the new bird feeder. Someone should outlaw retirement for men, she thought for the thousandth time. Without a doubt, James would come in angry about the feeder, and she'd have to listen to his tirade. He used to manage hundreds of employees across several states, but now all he had was his wife and a grown son to boss around. More than once, Helen had gone running to wherever Luke was and asked if she could spend the afternoon with him. Luke would give her that amused look of his and set her to weeding. All right, Helen said. What can I help you with? Never mind that she hadn't spoken to this woman in what, 20 years? I've been told that I have less than a year to live, and she cut off at the sound from Helen. Please, no sympathy. No one has ever wanted to leave this earth more than I do. I've been here much too long. But being told I have a full year left has made me think about what I still need to do in my life. At that, Helen smiled. Miss Eddie might no longer live in the town named after her great something grandmother, but she made an impact on it. That the town still existed was due to Miss Eddie. You've done a lot for Edeling. Yes, dear, I know. I've paid for things and written letters and raised a ruckus when people wanted to take away our homes. I've done all that, but that was easy. It just took money and noise. What I haven't done is right some wrongs that happened when I was a young woman. Helen nearly groaned out loud. Here it comes, she thought. The story. The one about her mother, Mary Alice, stole Miss Eddie's boyfriend at the end of World War II. Poor Miss Eddie, rotten old Mary Alice. She heard it all before. Yes, I know. No, Miss Eddie said, yet again cutting Helen off. I'm not talking about what your parents did back when the dinosaurs roamed the earth. That's done with. I'm talking about now, today. What happened then has changed today. Frowning, Helen turned away from the sight of her husband kicking the bird feeder, which he couldn't get to stand upright. You mean that if my father had married you, quite a few lives would have been different? She said slowly. Perhaps, Miss Eddie said, but she sounded amused. What do you know about the 14th of November, 1941? That it was just before the attack on Pearl Harbor, Helen asked cautiously. Then I take it that your eavesdropping when you were a little girl didn't let you hear everything, did it? In spite of herself, Helen laughed. No, it didn't. Miss Eddie, would you please tell me what this is about? My husband is about to come in for lunch, so I don't have much time. I want you to come here to Florida to visit me. Think you can bear to be away from your husband for that long? The man is retired. I may move in with you. Miss Eddie gave a dry little laugh. All right, but you can't tell anyone where you're going or who you're seeing. I have some things to talk to you about, and we have to figure out how you're going to do what has to be done. I will, of course, pay for everything, unless you're not interested, that is. A free trip? Secrets revealed? I'm very interested. How do we arrange this? I'll send all the travel information to your house and you can pick it up there. How's that handsome son of yours? Helen hesitated. Should she give the stock answer she gave to everyone else? Hardly anyone knew the full extent of what Luke had been through in the last few years, but Helen thought that somehow Miss Eddie knew. He's recovering slowly. Mostly he hides out in the gardens around town and dig holes. He doesn't want to talk to anyone about his problems, not even me. How about if I change his life? For good or bad? Helen asked, but she stood up straighter. Her only child, her son, was in pain, and she didn't know how to help him. For good, Miss Eddie said. All right, you better go give your husband lunch. Remember that you're not to tell anyone about me. The tickets should be there tomorrow by 10, so pick them up at the house, then call me. When you get here, I'll have someone meet you at the airport. All right, Helen said as the back door opened. Damn thing, she heard James muttering. I should write the Attorney General's office about that worthless piece of garbage. Helen rolled her eyes. Will do, she whispered. I have to go. Miss Eddie hung up, sat by the telephone, looked at it for a moment. Then she used the 2 canes to get out of the chair. Her legs were causing her so much pain today that she wanted to lie down and never get up. get up. She hobbled to the big box that sat on the top of the piano bench and thought of the photos inside and the full stories of what had happened to all of them so very long ago. She picked up the thin green book that was their high school senior book, class of 1937. She didn't need to open it because she could see all of them in her mind, and she was glad she hadn't been to Edeling, Virginia in the last few years. She missed the place, missed the trees and the changing seasons, but what she didn't like was seeing the Asian faces of her friends or seeing their names on gravestones. Who would have believed that the last remaining people alive would be her and David and Mary Alice and Prue, but she didn't count. Nearly all the others had died, some of them recently, some of them way back. Poor Sarah died back in, Eddie couldn't remember the date, but she knew it was a long time ago. She put the book down and looked at the little box that contained photos of all of them, but she didn't open it. She was feeling worse than usual today, and she was sure the doctor was wrong. She didn't have a year left, but she was glad of that. The pain in her old, scarred legs was getting worse. On the days when she did get out of bed, she had to force herself. And when she couldn't make herself get up, she had that annoyingly cheerful little nurse get her laptop computer, and she spent her whole day on it. What a glorious thing the internet was, and how very much she could find out through it. She even looked up David's family and seen that his eldest brother had made it through the war. He lived to make a success of a business. Several times she come close to calling the family, but the pain she knew she felt stopped her. Besides, she doubted if they ever heard of her. David was killed just weeks after they met. As Eddie walked towards the kitchen, she thought of Jocelyn. As always, just the thought of the young woman made her pain ease and her mind relax. It had been Alexander McDowell, the man whose life was at the center of all the secrets and heartache, who put Eddie together with the young girl. Her grandparents, the Scovilles, were dear, dear friends of mine, Alex said, his voice raspy from a lifetime of cigarettes. Their beautiful daughter, Claire, was sent to the best schools. At her coming out party, she had 11 marriage proposals, but she didn't marry until she was 39, and then she chose the country club's handyman. Miss Eddie had been through too much in her life to be a snob. What was he like as a person? Good to her. Lazy, barely literate, but good to her. They had a daughter named Jocelyn, and just a few years later, beautiful Claire died. Maybe it was the name Claire, or maybe it was that at the time Eddie had been at a crossroad in her life. She spent her working life traveling with Dr. Brenner. His family's fortune gave him the freedom to work unpaid, so he traveled around the world, helping wherever he was needed. It was said that if a bomb was dropped, Dr. Brenner booked his flight before it exploded. The truth was that Eddie did the booking, and she was always with the doctor. But when he retired, that meant Eddie did also. Should she go back to Edeling to live in that big house with her brother, who bored her to death? Or should she live quietly on her pension and savings and maybe write her memoirs? Yet another boring prospect. When Alex McDowell, a man she known since they were babies together, offered her a job managing charity funds and looking after the young granddaughter of his friends, Eddie accepted. I don't know what the child is like, Alex said those many years ago. For all I know, she could have the brains of her father. What I do know is that after her mother died, she lived with her grandparents. After they died, Jocelyn, that's the girl's name, was left in the full custody of her father. He doesn't harm her, does he? Miss Eddie asked quickly. No. I've had Pi looking in on her, and I've had PIs looking in on her, and I've had no reports of anything like that. But her father has reverted. Reverted? To what? Miss Eddie asked sharply. Alex chuckled. Worse than what you're imagining. He remarried to a woman with identical twin daughters, and they ride motorcycles together. For a second, Miss Eddie closed her eyes. The name Claire and the image of motorcycles filled her mind. Boca Raton, Alex was saying. Sorry, but I didn't hear all of that. I have a house in the same gated community where young Jocelyn lived with her father and the steps, as she calls them. One of my detectives talked to her. She talked to a stranger? Miss Eddie snapped. Again, Alex chuckled. You haven't changed, have you? I can assure you that the meeting was well chaperoned. There they were at a NASCAR race. A what? Just trust me on this. You'd hate the thing, Eddie. What I'm asking is, if you mind living in Boca Raton, you'll be 3 houses from Claire's daughter and watching out for her while you work for me. If it had been anyone else, Eddie would have checked her enthusiasm. But Alex was an old, trusted friend. I would love to, she said. Truly love to. I thought the warmth of Florida would be good for your legs. I see what she did there. Now, moving back to Edelin and being looked at with pity for being an old maid would be the best thing for my legs. You, an old maid? Alex said. I will always see you as 23 and the most beautiful woman in... Stop that, or I'll tell Lissy on you. She loves you as much as I do, Alex said quickly. So give me your address and I'll send you all the particulars. Thank you, Eddie said. Thank you very much. No, Alex said. The thanks are always to you. If it weren't for you... I know. Give kisses to everyone for me, she said, then hung up. It was a full moment before her smile nearly cracked her face. She was a great believer in doors opening and closing. The door with Dr. Brenner had closed and a new one had opened. Now, so many years later, Jocelyn Minton was the love of Miss Eddie's life, the child she didn't have, the heart of the home she missed out on. Whenever Jocelyn could escape her duties at the little college that worked her half to death but paid her little, she jumped in her car and drove home. After the obligatory, why do I struggle with that word? Obligatory visit to her father and stepmother, she headed straight to Eddie's house. The two of them would embrace, thoroughly glad to see each other. Jocelyn was the only person who wasn't intimidated by Eddie's stern appearance. She'd hug Eddie just as she'd done when she was a child. My lifesaver, she called Eddie. Without you, I don't know how I would have survived my childhood. Eddie knew it was an exaggeration after all. People didn't die from a lack of books. They didn't actually die from being stuck in a house with a father, stepmother, and 2 stepsisters who thought truck rallies were high society. But there were different ways to die. The truth was that their meeting had been the best thing that ever happened to both of them. Eddie had only lived in the lovely house Alex had bought for 4 months when she first saw the child with her family. The house they lived in had belonged to Jocelyn's grandparents, and after her mother's death, it had been willed to the granddaughter. It hadn't taken much work to find out that what money had been left had been quickly spent. Miss Ellie saw the parents in their leather cloths, their 2 overly tall twin daughters wearing as little as was legally allowable, then Jocelyn straggling behind them. She usually had a book in her hand and her dishwater blonde hair covering her face, but the first time Eddie got a good look at her, she saw intelligence in the girl's deep blue eyes. She wasn't the beauty that her mother had been. Miss Eddie had seen photos, but there was something about her that drew Eddie to the child. Maybe it was her square chin with just the tiniest hint of a cleft in it. It reminded her of another square chin that she once loved with all of her heart. Or maybe it was the way the child seemed to know that she was different from the people she lived with. At the beginning, Miss Eddie had twice arranged it so she could speak to the girl. One time was at the library, and they spent 30 minutes discussing the Narnia books. And just as they parted, they introduced themselves. The second time, Miss Eddie decided to take a walk that went past the child's house. She was outside on her bicycle, riding around and around on it. When I was a child, we played hopscotch, Miss Eddie said. What's that? If you have some chalk, I'll show you. Miss Eddie waited while Jocelyn went inside and got the chalk. Back then, Miss Eddie had only needed to use one cane for walking. But all those years of standing up while she took care of Dr. Brenner and his team had further damaged the muscles in her leg. And she knew that it wouldn't be long before she was forced to use two canes, then a walker, then she didn't like to think about other things. She felt someone watching her and turned to see Jocelyn's father. He was wearing what she known as a skivvy skirt, something men in her generation kept covered. He seemed to have tattoos all over his body, and he hadn't shaved for days. He was working on a blue motorcycle and constantly turning the handle to make it sound louder. The neighbors had quit complaining, but not because he was a homeowner in the restricted community. If that was all he was, they would have thrown him out. But Gary Minton was still the handyman, the one who came in the middle of the night when the toilets overflowed and flooded the bathrooms. He also pulled the child off the bottom of a swimming pool and climbed a tree to get a terrified little boy down. All in all, the noise of a few motorcycles was easy to put up with. But he was watching Miss Eddie as though trying to assess her, to see if it was all right for his daughter to be with her. Miss Eddie turned away. Better to ask if the child should be with him. It was only minutes before Jocelyn returned with the chalk, and Miss Eddie showed her how to draw the hopscotch chart on a concrete driveway. Throw the rock, then follow it on one foot. She'd been delighted by the game. A few days later, when Eddie opened her front door and saw the scrawny, poorly clad little girl, her blonde hair covering her face, sitting on her front step crying, she wasn't surprised. I'm sorry, the girl said as she jumped up. I didn't mean to. She didn't seem to know what to say. Eddie saw the corner of a plastic suitcase behind a hibiscus bush and figured the child was running away from home. That first day, Eddie purposefully kept the child at her house for nearly 3 hours. They talked of books and a science project she was making at school. What Eddie wanted to do was teach that father of hers a lesson. She wanted to make him worry. He should pay more attention to where his child was. While Eddie walked Jocelyn back to her house, she was thinking that when the relieved parents came to the door, she would give them a piece of her mind. But to Eddie's shock, her father and stepmother hadn't been aware that the girl had run away. Worse, when they were told, they weren't worried or surprised. Their attitude was that Jocelyn did what she wanted to, and they had no idea what that was. That night, Eddie called Alex and told him the child's situation was worse than he thought. She's extremely intelligent and loves learning and culture. You should have seen her face when I played Vivaldi. It's as if Shakespeare was living with the town morons. Did I tell you about those two repulsive stepsisters of hers? Yes, Alex says, but tell me again. The next weekend, as Eddie hoped she would, the girl showed up on the sidewalk, trying to look as though she were just passing by. Eddie asked the child in, then called her father and asked if she might be allowed to help Eddie with a project she was working on. That he didn't ask what the project was or inquire about the length of the stay solidified her bad impression of him. Yeah, her father said on the phone. I heard about you and I know where you live. Sure, Joss can stay there. If you got a lot of books, Joss will be happy. She's just like her mama. Then she may stay here for the afternoon? Eddie asked, sounding even more stiff than she usually did. She was trying to conceal a growing dislike for the man. Sure, let her stay. We're going to go to a rally, so we'll be home late. Hey, you want to keep her overnight? You can do that. I bet Joss will like that. Perhaps I shall, Eddie said, then hung up. Jocelyn had spent the night. In fact, they enjoyed each other's company so much that the child didn't leave until Sunday evening. As she started to go, she turned back, ran to Eddie, and threw her arms around her waist. Hold on one second. This is a long prologue. Like, whoa, that's a long prologue. Okay. You are the nicest, smartest, most wonderfulest person I've ever met. Eddie tried to remain aloof, but she couldn't help hugging the girl back. After that, Jocelyn spent weekends at Eddie's house and most of the holidays. They were two lonely people who needed each other and were thrilled to have found one another. They made a life together, with outings on Saturdays, church on Sundays, and time to be quiet and sit in the garden. As for her father, for all that Eddie had at first judged him to be uncaring, she found out that he loved his daughter as much as he loved her mother, and all he wanted was for Jocelyn to be happy. I can't give her what she would have had if her mother had lived, he told Eddie, but maybe you can. Joss can go to your house all she wants to, and if you need anything from me, just let me know. He glanced at his wife and twin stepdaughters waiting for him in the car. They're like me and we fit together, but Jocelyn is different. Eddie knew what it felt like to be different, and Jocelyn was as out of place in her home as Eddie had been at times in her life. The years with Jocelyn had been the happiest of Eddie's life. It had been wonderful to teach a young mind and to show her the world. When her family went to Disney World, Eddie took Jocelyn to New York to the Metropolitan Opera. When her stepsisters were wearing short shorts to show off their long legs, Jocelyn was wearing Eddie's pearl with a twin set. The summer Jocelyn turned 16, she and Miss Eddie went to London, Paris, and Rome together. The traveling had been difficult on Miss Eddie. Between her legs and her age, she didn't have much energy, but Jocelyn had spent the days wandering about the cities and photographing them. In the evening, she shared her new stories with Miss Eddie, old ones. In London, Eddie had showed Joss where she met David, no last name given, the man she loved and lost. There was only one man for me, and he was it, she said as she looked at the big white marble building where they met. By that time, Jocelyn had heard the story a dozen times, but she never tired of it. One love, a love for all time, a forever love. These were terms she heard many times. Hold out for it, Miss Eddie said. Wait for that kind of love, she advised. And Jocelyn had always agreed. One true love. Besides the pleasures of the time they spent together, as she grew older, Jocelyn often aided Miss Eddie with the charities she administered. Joss did research and sometimes even traveled to see them. 3 times she discovered fraud, and as a result, she developed friendships with a couple of men in the local police department. But what Miss Eddie never told us was that the money she gave away wasn't hers. She carefully concealed the fact that the money came from Alexander McDowell of Edeling, Virginia. In all their years of friendship, neither his name nor the town's was ever mentioned. When Jocelyn started going to a small college not too far away, Eddie had been lost without her. At first, Jocelyn had been so busy with her weekend job and all she had to do to put herself through school, she couldn't even call. They emailed and texted often. Miss Eddie loved any new technology that came out, but it wasn't the same. After 6 months of college, Miss Eddie started paying Jocelyn tuition so she wouldn't have to spend all her time at the school. This was done without the knowledge of her father or the Steps, as they called the two skinny blonde twins. Eddie didn't think her father would object, but she didn't want to risk it. And she especially didn't want to risk that the stepdaughters would hit her up for money. Although people often spoke of how beautiful the girls were, Eddie didn't find them so. Several times they showed up at Eddie's house when Jocelyn wasn't there, and they looked around her house as though they were trying to guess the value of everything. Eddie disliked them as much as she loved Jocelyn. Jocelyn graduated from college with a degree in English literature and got a part-time job work at the same school as a teaching assistant. And through a friend of Miss Eddie's, she got freelance employment helping others research the biographies they were trying to write. Joss was excellent at both jobs, and she especially loved spending her days in libraries, buried in old files. When Eddie realized that the little pains in her chest were more than just Asian, she started thinking about Jocelyn's future. If Eddie died and left everything to Jocelyn, as she planned to do, she had no doubt that the Steps would do what they could to take it from her. How? Eddie wanted to leave Jocelyn with a great deal more than just her possessions. She wanted to leave her with a fortune. No, what she really wanted was to leave her a family. Jocelyn had spent most of her life living with old people. First her grandparents, then Miss Eddie. Eddie had taken everything she knew about Jocelyn into consideration. Then she spent a long time and done a lot of work to figure out how to give Jocelyn what she needed. Now she closed the lid on the book of memorabilia and slowly made her way to the kitchen. What dreadful thing had the little nurse left her for dinner? Probably something with the word taco in the title. When she heard the overnight delivery truck pull into the drive to pick up the package for Helen, she smiled. As Eddie opened the refrigerator, she thought that the best thing about all this was that she wasn't going to be around when Jocelyn found out that Eddie had, well, not really lied, but she omitted an awful lot about herself. Since Jocelyn loved to ask Eddie about her long life, it hadn't been easy to skip years and brush over the whole truth, but Eddie had managed it. She pulled out the big salad that had been left for her and put it on the table. Jocelyn wasn't going to be happy when she was told certain things, but Eddie had faith that Jocelyn would search to find the answers to everything. Smiling, Eddie thought how her life plan for Jocelyn excluded those two tall, too skinny stepsisters who paraded around with next to no clothes on. That those girls had become famous, a term Miss Eddie detested, said much too much about the modern world. Jocelyn didn't think Eddie knew it, but the young woman had given up a great deal to look after an old woman, and Eddie wanted to make it up to her. What Eddie wanted to give Jocelyn was the truth. But she wasn't just going to tell her everything. She was going to make Jocelyn search it out, work for it, something she was so very good at doing. "And please forgive me," Eddie whispered. That was her most fervent hope, that Jocelyn would forgive her for so many secrets kept for so very long. "I made a promise, a vow," she whispered, "and I honored it." In her mind, She began composing the letter she was going to leave with her will. And that's the end of the prologue. Wow, that was a long prologue. A prologue. Wow. Okay, so it's a mystery, kind of sounded like it's a mystery of some sorts, but it's a romance because it's a romance. So she using Helen to set. It sounds like Eddie is going to use Helen to set Jocelyn up with Helen's son. Could that be the romance? And what could be the secret? Well, I guess if this is chosen, we shall find out. So with that being said, book 2 is next. Bye for now.